There's this idea that many
Hello,
people put
comrades, and welcome
forward
to the
that
Revolution
America
Report.
right
Thanks a
now
lot for
is
joining us on
governed
this
by
live
just
stream.
unbridled
We are going to be
capitalism, that
doing
we
a
have free
reaction live
markets
stream. Obviously, this is
trampling
something
on
that we don't
poor
do that
people who
often. It's
have
quite
no choice
a
but to
rare
go
thing for us to
along
do on
and
the
be
Revolution
slaves
Report.
to
But
the
I think I'm going to do them a bit
capitalists. While
more,
this represents
just
a
because I think
fundamental
they're a little bit
misunderstanding
more
of what
lighthearted. They
capitalism
can be
and free
funny
markets
sometimes.
really are, it also
And
represents
in the
a
past, when we've done them,
massive
when I've done them,
misunderstanding about
they've
how
gotten
much
quite a bit of
capitalism there
attention.
really is in the United
So, for
States.
those of
Because the
you who have been
reality
following for a
is,
long time, you
today,
guys
the
remember
United
we did
States of
some
America
reaction
is
videos
far
to
more communist than
some
most
bloggers
people would
who were
like to
talking
admit.
about
And to
the
understand
Ukraine
why, we
conflict before
really
the
have to go
military
back to the
operation was
source.
launched.
Going back to the
We also
source
did
is
a
something
reaction
that
video
many
to
people
Undercover Boss,
recommend
that
if they
hilariously
think it
stupid
will help out
capitalist
their
propaganda
case.
TV
For
show.
instance,
So
many
we're
Christians
thinking of
say, hey,
doing more
you
of
probably
those.
don't understand
Before we
Christianity
begin, I
that
just
well
want to
if you've
say
never
thank
read the
you.
Bible and you've just listened to other
There's audio
people
from the
talk
video playing.
about
Okay,
Christianity.
here we
You
go.
got to go to the source. Also, many
Also,
free market
yeah, sorry about that, comrades. When I turn on the live stream, the video audio already started. Thanks for letting me know in the chat. But yeah, before we get started with the live stream, with the commentary, the reaction to it, I just want to say thank you to the comrades who had already given. There's a big problem with the sound. How's the sound now, comrades? You hear everything? Hello? Put in the chat if everything's okay with the audio or if there's a problem with it. All right, so I can because I don't want to go on if there's some major problems. But I'm guessing Chris Castro's is talking about the sound problem from before. All right, audio's fine now. Thank you, Fergal. All right. Again, before we start with the reaction and the actual live stream, I just want to say thanks to our comrades who gave us super chats. Welsh Republic Podcast, thanks a lot. The Risen People, Ire, thank you very much. We appreciate all the donations that you guys are giving us, especially and another special thanks to our comrades on Patreon. If you haven't checked us out there, definitely check it out. And the last thing before we go to the actual reaction that I want to mention is that this reaction video was chosen by one of our comrades in the Discord chat. So I put out an announcement asking people to submit some videos that they'd like to see a reaction to. So a very big thank you to DLA in our general chat on Discord for this video. I think it's quite a funny video. We're going to have a good time reacting to it. As John Campbell Breckenridge is saying in the chat, got to be the most communism equals government does stuff video. I think so as well. So, comrades, if you're not already in the Discord, make sure to join us there. We've got a vibrant community, and we have direct discussions there with myself, as well as, making suggestions for videos like this as well. So without further ado, comrades, I'm going to set up the stream now so that you can see me in a little box in the corner, and we can get the video rolling. And I'll pause it once in a while to give my commentary because there's definitely some funny stuff that we can see here. Okay. All right. So let's get started.
There's this idea that many people put forward that America right now is governed by just unbridled capitalism, that we have free markets trampling on poor people who have no choice but to go along and be slaves to the capitalists. Well,
okay, so let me open up that box there. So we're starting off on the right foot, right? He's talking about how America, as people are saying that America is governed by unbridled capitalism that crushes poor people and forces people into submission through the threat of destitution. That's actually true. Okay, that's a statement I agree with as we get into this video. All right.
While this represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what capitalism and free markets really are, it also represents.
All right, comrades, here we go. We're already we already see this stuff starting.
Presents a massive misunderstanding about how much capitalism there really is in the United States. Because the reality is, today, the United States of America is far more communist than most people would like to admit. And To understand why, we really have to go back to the source. Going back to the source is something that many people recommend if they think it will help out their case. For instance, many Christians say, hey, you probably don't understand Christianity that well if you've never read the Bible and you've just listened to other people talk about Christianity. You got to go to the source. Also, many free market proponents and capitalists will say, hey, you've got to go read the source material. You got to see what the original thinkers on this topic said. People like Milton Friedman, Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, and Adam Smith. And guess what? It's the same with communism as well. You've got to go back to the source. In this case, the Communist Manifesto.
Okay, first of all, just before we get into this, the one thing I want to talk about in terms of going to the source, it's obviously important to understand the origins of an idea to better understand its relevance in modern society, but a system changes with time, regardless of the founding ideas that it has. That's an important thing to understand, and that's really what sets apart Marxist dialectical materialist analysis of society from the rest, right? He's going, this guy is looking at modern society with an idealist approach, actually. From the, he's saying that America is communist based on some very vague understanding of Marx's ideas. But if you look at society as from a materialist perspective, right? We look at current society, we see it as a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? We look at modern society, we see that it has all of the aspects, all of the core aspects of capitalism that Marx described at the time. And a materialist will say, okay, well then this is, the current state of capitalist society is the logical outcome of capitalist production and evolution. They wouldn't say that it's for some reason communist right now because capitalism isn't aligning with the original suppositions that were made by Alex Smith, what's his name? Smith, I forgot his first name. Or any of these original capitalist theorists, right? But those theorists made their theories about capitalism in a different time. They made it in pre-imperialist capitalist society. Capitalism's a lot different now. And actually, the way capitalism is now actually goes to kind of give more credence to what Marx was talking about at the time of when he wrote Capital, when he talked about the fact that capitalist accumulation leads to the centralization of capital in the hands of fewer and fewer people and the immiseration of the working class, something that led to the material conditions in which Lenin expanded on Marxist theses talking about imperialism being the highest stage of capitalism, right? So what we're looking at right now, as a communist, looking at it as a materialist, you'd say, okay, this is imperialism, the logical next step of, capitalism that had free competition, free markets and everything. But the obviously libertarian position, the position of this guy probably would be to say that, oh, this isn't real capitalism, this is some sort of corrupted, corporatist, communist, fascist situation. So, okay, let's get farther into this.
This manifesto is technically written by Karl Marx, but he wasn't the one that put it together into a book. These were scattered thoughts, and his friend Friedrich Engels compiled them together into the book that we now call the Communist Manifesto. And so let's take a look at the source material, at what communism truly is at its heart, to see how much capitalism we have left in America and how much we are actually leaning towards original source material communism.
All right, one thing I want to say here really quick is that, again, as we mentioned earlier with the comment that our comrade made in the chat about communism equals government doing stuff, right? I mean, just the fact that this guy, Heresy Capital, the way he phrases the question, right? How much capitalism, how much communism? This is not, like like communism are not quantifiable things, right? There's not like, it reminds me of that meme you could find on the internet where someone purposely misquotes Marx, attributing a fake quote to him, saying that the more the state does stuff, the more communisms there is. That's basically like the analysis and argument of this guy, right? First of all, communism is not a society that's ever been achieved, first of all. It's a stateless society, but we'll just give him the benefit of the doubt and consider the fact that he's probably talking about a country that's run by a communist party that's actually socialist, all right? But if he means that, then that means that there would have to be a dictatorship of the proletariat, which there's not in the United States, right? So it doesn't really make sense to talk about a little bit of capitalism or a little bit of communism here. But let's get further into what he's talking about.
Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx says, the theory of communists may be summed up in this single sentence: the abolition of private property. And what we
Okay, well, that's true. All right, that's an accurate thing.
are going to look at next is going to be kind of the 10 pillars of communism, and we're going to see how it all kind of falls under that umbrella.
But wait a second. I mean, I just understood. He's trying to make the argument that the United States is communist. But where is the government abolishing private property? Have I missed something? Is there expropriation going on of American landlords and corporate elites? If there is, then somebody should let me know, because, I mean, and I'm a journalist. I mean, I think I would know about that if that were taking place. Make sure to let me know if you hear about any expropriation going on. I'll be right there.
That it's all about centralized control, removing any individual's ability to own anything themselves and making them purely into work slaves.
Okay, first of all, there's like a kindergarten mistake that this guy makes, thinking that private property is the same as personal property. I mean, this is like really, really basic stuff. I hate to harp on it because it's every leftist on the internet is like attacking capitalists for making that lack of distinction, but it's really obvious. I mean, private property does not mean taking someone's toothbrush. I mean, you all know that, but this guy doesn't.
Labor slaves of the government, the state, because the abolition of private property extends far beyond actual ownership of like real estate and land. It's really about the abolishment of individual sovereignty. Starting off, the first pillar of communism from the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So people can't own land. We're going to have the government own all land, and then they can tell people where they can live, what they can do with that land, and charge people rents. Now,
okay, so first of all, if you want to learn a little bit about like how housing was dealt with in socialist countries, specifically the Soviet Union, obviously it's a little bit different in every socialist country. They've got their own specificities, but there was not really actually rent charged to people in the USSR. I mean, as we understand it in a capitalist way, right? Not looking at rent as the abstract idea of someone taking money from you so you can live there, but rent as in the money that is going to someone for unproductive purposes, right? That's just going in their pocket, not to maintain the apartment building or utilities or anything. And if we look at rent in that case, rent didn't exist for working class people in the Soviet Union because people paid like 3 to 5% of their income, and that money that they paid to the government was for management of the building and the utilities. It was not going into someone's pocket. And the second thing that I actually didn't mention in my short, which you guys might find interesting and is relevant to this, is that the state did not own the majority of houses in the USSR. They were run cooperatively. That's another thing to understand. So the people owned their houses. That form of property in terms of land where people were living on was so common that after the fall of the Soviet Union, the way they transitioned to capitalism was giving everyone who lived in a house, which was everyone because there were no homeless in the USSR, giving them vouchers that proved ownership of where they lived. So everyone, people owned their own houses in the USSR in a cooperative property form.
At first glance, you might think, okay, good, we don't have to check off that box. But not so fast. Consider this. What happens if you don't pay your property taxes? Property taxes are essentially rents paid to the government, and if you don't, they will take back that land. And if somebody else has the authority to come and take something back from you for not paying you to use it, then you don't actually really own it. They do.
So, first of all, okay, taxes don't exist in every socialist country that's ever existed. So obviously tax is not Sorry, comrades. I thought I had turned the audio on, but it appears I did not. Anyway, I'll repeat what I said. First of all, actually, as Alex Oliveira mentioned in the chat, there's no taxes in the DPRK, right? So taxes are not an integral part of socialism per se. North Korea does without them, and I wanted to give a shout out to Battle Cossack for the super chat. This is the same people who think that wokeism is communism. Sounds like something that Malay would say. Absolutely. And another thing is that I don't really agree with this idea that tax is theft, first of all, okay? Because there's so much more theft going on through the thievery of people's labor through wage slavery, that if you could quantify the amount of labor that's being stolen from workers through the institution of wage labor by the capitalists, I think it would pale in comparison to what the state is taking in terms of taxes. And at least some of those taxes go back into public infrastructure and stuff that obviously the point of them, like roads and infrastructure and everything, is to facilitate commerce, but a lot of that stuff has the dual function of being useful to people in society. So, but in terms of capitalists, we're not getting anything. That's going right into their pockets. So I don't really understand the argument that tax is theft. Well, I understand it, and I just think it's a bad argument. So.
It goes further than property taxes on the real estate that you own, because the federal government themselves own a ton of land across the United States. In fact, in the West, the government owns 47% of all the land. A recent study by the Cato Institute recently found that the government may be able to get up to $1.8 trillion to auction off the land that it owns, which isn't a ton in the scheme of things, like especially compared to like the national debt. But one of the reasons that land isn't very valuable is precisely because the government owns it. Private ownership of something allows people to transform into something that has more value. That's what innovation is. That's what invention is. That's what wealth creation is. It's taking raw materials, combining them or changing them in a way to create something that has more value than it used to.
Okay, one thing has to be said about this strange argument that the government owning land means that it can't be improved in value, or it's going to remain not valuable as opposed to privately owned land. If that were the case, after the fall of the USSR, there wouldn't have been such a rush of speculators to go there, buy up all of the factories and equipment and valuable things that were created by the state under a socialist planned economy over so many decades. Speculators would not have gone there to sell that off for pennies on the dollar to the West. There wouldn't have been a rush to basically pillage the Russian economy that was in the 1990s exclusively made up of things that were built in the Soviet Union under the guidance of the state. So, I mean, that's clearly not true, what he just said about the state not being able to coordinate resources to make land valuable or create value. That's just nonsense, really.
That's why all the real estate that actually has a ton of value today got that way from private ownership, and all the land the government owns did not. And so considering that the first pillar of communism is abolition of private property and putting it in the hands of the government, we are a lot closer to this than not. All right, now let's take a look at number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. For anybody not aware, progressive or graduated income tax is simply the more you make, the more you pay, and that is 100% the system we have today in America. The tax brackets go from 10% at the lower end up to 37% at the higher end, which means the more you make, the more you pay, which just from a usage standpoint, the argument for taxes, typically it boils down to, okay, well, if you don't pay, nobody wants to pay taxes, who's going to build the roads? As if private companies don't have the ability to own land and lay asphalt. Like, it's a ridiculous argument, but never.
Okay, so this guy, by making this argument, just contradicted himself essentially. Like, he's like, so private companies don't have the ability to lay asphalt? What a ridiculous argument. That's exactly how I feel when he says that the governments are completely unable to somehow create value on land they own. Like, someone changes. Imagine someone comes from a productive, innovative corporation and starts working in the government. All of a sudden, they lose the ability to understand how to create something valuable out of the means of production. This is a ridiculous statement. Equally as ridiculous is to say, as he said, that private corporations can't lay asphalt. I mean, that's completely true. But here's the thing, right? There's a reason why under capitalism, private companies are not the ones laying the asphalt, okay? And the reason is not what this guy thinks. It's not because we live in a communist country, okay? It's because the state is run by the ruling class. We live in a country where there's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, okay? And later in this video, he talks about ruling classes. So he obviously understands that there's a ruling class, but he thinks the state is a ruling class. The state is run by the bourgeois class. So everything the state does is for the benefit of the capitalist class, right? Could you imagine if the government allowed private companies to build roads? If the street in front of your house was built and owned by one private company, and the street down the road from your house was built by another private company. And all of these private companies, obviously, if they're going to be building roads, they got to make profit. Capitalism 101. So you would be driving and paying tolls every single block. Like, it would be impossible. And it's not even, and the government doesn't allow that, not because you would be paying tolls, but because commerce would be paying tolls, interstate commerce. So with the choice of making public or private roads, comes the choice between the profits of national and multinational corporations easing their ability to move products and allow their workers to get from point A to point B easily, or favoring the profit of these hypothetical companies that are building roads. Obviously, the state is not going to favor the road speculators. They're going to be favoring the oil companies and the large manufacturers that need to make sure that their products can get from point A to point B effectively, so that they can continue the capitalist production process, the circulation of capital, obviously. So, this kind of really contradicts the point he made about the government not being able to do anything with road or with property that it controls. But it just goes to show that, look, everything done in society can be done by either a corporation or the government. And the difference in terms of who does what is not even connected to whether it's a corporation really or whether the government does it. It depends on who's going to get rich as a result of that. The state or capitalists, right? And depending on who owns the state is going to determine who wins out. We could see that in the example that I just mentioned in the United States, where there's a capitalist class. And we can see it in the case of China, for example, where the Communist Party is in power, but they still have markets and some degree of small-scale capitalist activity, but under the dictatorship of the proletariat. So it actually ends up benefiting society, and we see accomplishments like the developments, that, like the usage of the money that they make from these government enterprises, but also from taxing private enterprise in reinvestment into things like bringing tens of millions of people out of poverty, construction of public transport. Again, this is completely dependent not on whether it's not on whether it's the state or a private company doing it. It's who is running the state. That's what is going to determine who wins out in this.
Nevertheless, it's the use argument of, hey, everybody has to pay taxes because we all use these common things, these common resources that only the government has the ability to do. If that's the argument, why is the income tax progressive? Why is it graduated? Rich people aren't using more of the roads than poor people. They're not using more public services than poor people. In fact, the wealthier you are, the more you are likely to not use the government services and pay more for private services instead. And so it makes no sense that the more you make, the more you pay from a logical standpoint. But as per the pillars of communism, that is the thing to do. And in America, that is exactly what we do. So box number one is...
All right. Again, this is a very strange argument because... yeah, in a progressive tax system, the rich pay more taxes, but again, like I mentioned before, the roads favor favor interstate commerce. They're actually making business easier for large corporations. And also, the people paying the most in taxes obviously are going to be, well, the people that are supposed to be paying the most in taxes, because actually the largest corporations have the best ways to find loopholes through that. But assuming they're paying the most in taxes, right? They're supposed to be paying lots in taxes. Exxon, Mobil, gas companies, oil companies, all the biggest means of production. But I guarantee you that, well, I mean, first of all, the largest expenditure of the U.S. Federal budget is military. And that military is going and fighting wars around the world to represent the interests of big capital so that they can exploit the world's resources. So actually, if the richest capitalists really were paying as much as they are supposed to be paying, then they would really be getting the biggest bang for their buck, because why the hell do we need to be sending working class people to places to kill other people in other countries? It makes no sense for us, but it makes sense for the capitalist class.
Half checked, and box number two is fully checked. We are just barreling along towards communism here. All right, number three, the abolition of all rights of inheritance.
All right, comrades, I'm going to skip a couple parts here because I watched this in advance and I took some notes because I wanted to make sure that I could get all my ideas out there. But the next things that he talks about, and obviously as we saw at the beginning of the video, he's taking this all from the pillars of communism that are illustrated in the Communist Manifesto. But the next thing that he talks about is abolition of inheritance and confiscation from rebels and immigrants. He says obviously like, okay, we don't do that. And that stuff is like not really relevant to any confusion in the U.S., because in the U.S. obviously there's inheritance, and confiscation from rebels and immigrants is something that's going to happen under any revolutionary situation that takes place. So I'm just going to fast forward here a little bit to when he starts talking about credit. Hold on a second. Inheritance, blah, 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 credit. Let's get to credit. Yeah, here we go. Centralization of credit. All right. Let's continue from here.
Of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Yes, that is 100% just a description of what the Federal Reserve does. We have 100% checked off this box, and it's been that way since 1913. We have a...
All right, well, once again, I'm going to stop him right there, because are we really saying that the federal bank is an example of communism? That would be really hilarious if that were the case, but Dude, centralization of credit is not something specific to communism. Every modern government has a treasury or a national bank that centralizes credit, that has an interest rate at which other banks can take loans out from the central bank, which basically determines a lot on the large scale of macroeconomics. That's not something specific to communism. Pretty much every capitalist country and communist country has it. And also, if you want to get nitpicky, right, the federal bank is actually is probably the least likely contender to be accused of being communist. Okay, not only because it acts as a vehicle for U.S. imperialism and dollarization all over the world, but it's not even completely owned by the state. It's a semi-privately owned entity. What other country has a national bank that is not completely owned by the state? Only in the U.S. Also, before we go on, I see some super chats in the chat. Thanks a lot, Joe the Red. Appreciate it. It's a capitalist state. Exactly. He can't fathom the idea of there being a capitalist class ruling the state. He thinks that the state is a class in itself, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, that's a really that's a guy who's not educated in political economy, right? I don't know. Maybe he makes a lot of money doing whatever, speculating or whatever. I mean, it's gambling, but he doesn't have a good idea of political economy, that's for sure. Liberals look at the state in a metaphysical way. Exactly. They see that the state as its own entity outside of society with its own interests. Exactly. This guy's got to read not just the Communist Manifesto and then say, "Oh, communism's so dumb. I know all about it because I read a 50-page brochure." He should really be reading The State and Revolution, to be honest. But Kinkle, I want to address some things in the chat right now because you guys are talking about a lot of interesting stuff before we move on. What are this guy's credentials, Kinkle? That's a good question. I think he's just some sort of independent speculator on the internet. He's got his own financial company, but I really don't think he's got any serious... I mean, as we'll see later on, he is against formal education. So that's really a problem as I see it. But Midwestern Marks also makes some good points in the chat. Glad to have you, Midwestern Marks. Always a pleasure. His mistakes are coming from the fact that he doesn't recognize that capitalism is evolving towards a socialist mode of production, but still on a capitalist basis. Exactly. The more the economy grows, the more economic planning becomes a necessity for the bourgeoisie. That's another thing. We got to understand that economic planning in itself, right, is not specific actually to socialism. Obviously, the U.S. doesn't have a national plan, but you bet your sweet ass that corporations are planning, and they definitely engage in capitalist economic planning. So, and that sets the stage for workers to seize control of the economy and to plan it for ourselves. Exactly. That's why the key element of a socialist society or a communist society, as he's saying, is the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the key element. So let's go on.
Central bank with state capital, state control of credit, and it has an exclusive monopoly on banking and the creation of money. I bet most people didn't know that the existence of a central bank is pillar number 5 for communism, which makes sense because money makes up half of every transaction that happens. So if you can control the money, which you can only do with a central bank, you can control the money, you can somewhat control the flow of resources, everything that happens in an economy. So obviously that's going to be a pillar of communism, and it's going to be antithetical to freedom. Number 6.
Okay, as I said before, right? I mean, this is also something that's a pillar of modern capitalism and under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? Again, like we established, the state is a class tool, not a manifestation of communism. And states have even existed throughout all of history. I mean, come on. Let's get real.
Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Now, over the last couple of years, it has been very clear how deep the government is involved in the means of communication in the United States, from its influence over the media to its influence over social media platforms, censoring the ability of individual citizens to communicate with one another things that they want to talk about, because essentially that's all social media is. It is communication. Further than that, there are actual state-controlled, government-controlled laws that regulate communication, the flow of information through the internet and through telephones and through cell phone signals, through radios. So they don't 100% outright control all communication, but there is a heavy amount of influence. And
okay, this is a subject I really love. Since when was censorship an aspect of communism? Since when is censorship a communist thing? Censorship has been around forever. I mean, since when the printing press was established and books started to be printed en masse, that censorship, books almost immediately started to face censorship. I mean, what class society didn't have censorship? Socrates was killed for making statements that the ruling elites didn't like. I mean, was ancient Greece a communist country? I mean, what the hell?
centralization of transportation in the hands of the state. Obviously, we've got interstate highways, we've got government-controlled transportation, we've got public transportation. These are all communist things. These are not free market things. Free market is individual, it is privatized, which essentially just means if two people voluntarily want to interact with each other and want to have an exchange, they can do that, and no third party can force them to or stop them from doing it. And if the
like, okay, once again, right, about the interstate commerce. Like I said before, I mean, interstate highways were created to facilitate interstate commerce. They were not built as, I don't know, some sort of evil project to steal freedom away from potential road speculators. I mean, the interstate highway system started under Eisenhower, and it was created to facilitate interstate commerce. It was done along the creation of suburbs across the country that were built in a way to facilitate commerce. That were built. I mean, the American dream of the 1950s was literally crafted to make people have to buy cars to get anywhere. It was literally crafted to facilitate commerce and profit. Not in the interest of anything else. Not in the interest of working class people. Not in the interest of public transport or to make people's lives easier. It was made to facilitate profit.
Government can control and have that ownership of transportation to the extent that it does, it has the ability to stop it. And that's where the danger is. Forcing people to move from one location to another or stopping people from being able to move from one location to another. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Essentially, this is all just about controlling the flow of resources. If one person wants to operate a factory to make things and try and sell them for a profit, nope, it's the state that is going to dictate what gets made, who makes it, where it's made, and what allocation of resources go to those things that are getting made. Again, the elimination of individual rights and full control over everything by the ruling class, the government, the state. Number 8.
Okay, again, what he's talking about a little about like control of the means of production, I mean, is correct, right? An economic plan means control of the state over the means of production, but again, the state is not a ruling class. It's a tool of the ruling class, and the U.S. is also, I mean, it's not a planned economy, right? All this stuff that he says is done to eliminate individual freedom and everything, in this case, doesn't even happen in the U.S. So, but I mean, government planning under a socialist economy, again, because it's under the dictatorship of the proletariat, it's not about destroying individual freedom. It's actually about giving the individual freedom, because the economy restructures itself not to maximize exploitation of people, make them work the hardest and the longest that they can, but to create a society in which people have free time to pursue their own interests, and so they don't have to work in a factory their whole lives. That's the goal of socialist countries. It's always been, so that doesn't really make any sense in terms of what he's talking about.
Equal liability of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Very interesting that the wording choice here is equal liability of all to work. This means that everybody must work and must work equally. So everybody must go to work a specific number of hours, regardless of what they want to do with their time, how much they want to work, how little they want to work. If one person wants to work less because they want to spend a little bit more time with their kids, or a single person wants to work a lot more because they can work overtime and make a lot more money while they're still young and they're single and they don't have kids, doesn't matter. Equal liability of all to work.
All right, so now we've come to probably I would say the biggest misrepresentation of communism in the whole video, right? This is like a complete misunderstanding of, or not even misunderstanding, just misrepresentation. I mean, obviously he completely missed the thing that Marx said, which is like his most famous quote that you don't even have to read the Communist Manifesto to know, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, which is something that implies exactly the opposite of what he just claimed, that society would accommodate people who, for example, need to spend more time taking care of their family, for example. So they have less time, so they have to work less. And younger people without any families would work more. This is like the general idea behind from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. A society that would take the interests of the workers into account rather than the interests of profit. Exactly the opposite of how he's characterizing what Marx is talking about with the liability to work. And again, by the liability to work, Marx is talking about putting the idle capitalists to work, not the people who are like, oh, I have a family and I have to spend more time with them, not forcing them to work more than they have to. It's about making the speculators who make money off of doing nothing productive, putting them to productive work, not forcing work upon families or anything like that. I mean, just some nonsense that he's talking about.
Autonomous drone for the state. Now, at first glance, this may seem like another one of those things that doesn't really apply in America. But in America, the average American works 37.8 hours every single week. Women work, men work, young work, and old work. Almost all are essentially wage slaves, meaning they have no wealth, they have no savings, they have a negative net worth, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And on
Dude, this guy is literally describing capitalism. He even uses the term wage slavery. I mean, this is all of these things that he's saying, oh, this is a communist, this is some communist shit, and America's communist. All of this stuff he's saying is stuff that Marx talks about, right? He doesn't talk about it in the Communist Manifesto, but he talks about it in Capital. In Capital 1, 2, 3. He's even got a theory called the immiseration of the working class, where he talks about inflation, how inflation erodes salaries, it makes our lives harder, and then we're supposed to be thankful to bosses who give us raises that are not even commensurate to the real value that's lost to inflation, right? So workers are constantly screwed by this capitalist system. This is something that has existed since the beginning of capitalism, even before imperialism, the stage of imperialism. Free competition and genuinely free markets back during that time, I mean, workers were still screwed. And it has nothing to do with communism. What the hell? Wage slavery is literally what communists are against.
Top of that, when you count federal income tax, as well as state taxes, sales taxes, and other consumption taxes, many people are spending about 50% of all the money they earn just on taxes, which means the first 6 months of the year, all that work they're doing is just to pay the state, the government. And so because of the government, because of the rules, because of the taxes, because of inflation causing 2 people in every household to have to work instead of it used to be just 1 person in a household could work and make enough for the whole family, we do have a nation where most people have that equal liability to work. They're trapped in the rat race running on that hamster wheel, and they're not going to be able to escape that. And with half of the value of your labor just going to pay the government every single year, this really is a lot closer to that communist ideal.
Dude, he is like actually super, he actually understands the capitalist system quite well, like accidentally in that regard, but he thinks it's communism. Like what in the world? I mean, he makes exactly the point I made about inflation, right? But here's one thing I have to mention, because he says that this is all like a state scheme, inflation, but we have to understand that the state has nothing to do with inflation. Okay, the state can manipulate the trajectory of inflation by deploying the mechanisms of the central bank. Obviously, raising the central interest rate in a country is something that is an attempt to reduce inflation. Lowering the central interest rate is an attempt to stimulate economic activity. But the cause of inflation is companies raising their prices. Right? In the course, and again, this is something that Karl Marx talks about, in the course of rising prices of production for the capitalist class, instead of innovating, instead of dipping into the pockets of the ultra-rich CEO executives that are getting bonuses for no reason, the companies pass that cost of the rising cost of production onto the consumers by raising prices of the products. That's inflation. That's the capitalists passing on their expenses to the workers so that they can fit the bill. That is real theft, not taxes. That is the real theft. Before we go on, I also see some activity in the chat again. Joe the Red, thanks for the other donation. Yeah, it does look like this guy is basically a utopian socialist. I mean, he describes capitalism and blames communism, Alex, exactly. Like, I don't understand. This guy is like, this guy actually, I don't know if he's just being deceptive or if he accidentally understands a lot of what Karl Marx talks about in Capital, but just accuses communism of being part of that system. I don't understand.
9. The combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the populace over the country.
Okay, comrades, I saw this video in advance, so just get ready, okay? Put your hats that protect you from stupidity on, because this is one of the funniest misrepresentations of the video.
Again, just top-down control over the flow of resources, who can do what, where the stuff goes, what is made and what is not made, and where people live, which you do by controlling transportation and owning the land. Just an arbitrary decision here to just spread people out. For what reason? What evidence is given? None. That this would have any beneficial result. What argument or reasoning is there that cities and countrysides existing, towns, delineation between those, some populations close together, some populations spread out, has any negative effect? There is no reasoning or argument. Please go read this book. It's terrible. But apparently that is something that is needed to achieve this communist utopian dream.
Okay. This part, obviously, of Marxism went completely over his head, okay? Because it's so clear. He's like, oh, go read this book. The Communist Manifesto is like 50 to 60 pages. I don't exactly remember exactly how many pages. I read it many, many years ago, but it's like not even 100 pages. You're not going to get an understanding of the reasoning or evidence for what was written in the Communist Manifesto by just reading the Communist Manifesto. It was a call to action. It was not like the entire collected works of Karl Marx, because he very succinctly describes why there needs to be an elimination of the difference between town and country in capital. He talks about that. Because of the fact, and he in a very educated and succinct way describes why there's a difference between the town and country in capitalism. Because agriculture, under the capitalist mode of production, lags behind the development of industry under the capitalist mode of production. This was why the Soviet Union was so, for example, was so determined to eliminate this difference, because I mean, you know what is a manifestation of what Marx is describing? I'll give you the easiest manifestation for people in the United States, right? You know how like liberals in the big cities are like, oh, people who live in the countryside are uneducated, uncultured rednecks, like fuck them. And people in the countryside usually view people in the cities as sort of pretentious, cosmopolitan, decadent. This is a manifestation of what Marx was talking about when it comes to the difference between town and country. And this is why when he talks about that difference being eliminated, he doesn't mean that like everything must be, the entire countryside must be converted into, you know, a city that's sort of on the scale of New York. It's not like that. It's about developing the cultural level of the countryside so that it's equal to that of the towns, and to essentially industrialize agriculture and turn it into factory farming. You know, there's a very lot. I mean, this guy says that there's no evidence given. What's the reason? Well, actually, there is evidence given, and there's a very good reason. You could, if you want to learn about communism, you have to read not just the Communist Manifesto. Read Capital. It's three huge books. I mean, if I can get through that, you can. It's a succinct explanation for all this, and then you can do a video about how America's communist.
And then finally, number 10, free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, and a combination of education with industrial production. Now, if you have watched my recent video on the public school system, this will not come as any shock to you. The public school system is designed from the ground up, from when it was started here in America, to create a workforce, an army of employees that is there for the benefit of the government. Because remember, it happened.
Okay, here we go again, right? The education system is to create a workforce for the government. Again, we go back to the idea of the state as a tool of the ruling class. I mean, part of what he's saying is true. The state education system is made to institutionalize people, but it's not made to create workers for the state. It's made to create workers for the capitalist class. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? And I'm sure that the net value of what capitalists are making in terms of stolen labor from the heightened educational level of people going through the state education system is much higher than what the government is going to be making out of income tax from them.
Right as soon as the income tax was started as well. So we create a nation of people who are employees. We do that by brainwashing them in schools and training them to become employees. And that's the only thing that they're good at, so that we can tax half of their income. We create a giant population full of taxpayers. And I bet most people don't know that free public schooling, or it's not free, public schooling paid by the state, by taxpayers, is a core tenet of communism. It's so that you can brainwash the children and turn them into work slaves for the state. And it's very...
Dude, free public education is a tenet of any modern government. It's not. It doesn't come out when communism arrived on the scene. It's a consequence of modernity. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Go back to Little House on the Prairie, or like people studying in like church charity schools? I mean, I really don't understand what this guy is trying to suggest. I mean, I can't think of any sort of private option that would be better than state education, even in capitalism. It sounds like a nightmare.
Interesting that they specifically say the abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. They don't want children working. They don't want children learning useful skills. They want children brainwashed into being just factory machine parts. It's also worth noting.
Okay, so this guy thinks that if child labor is allowed, that children are going to be working and gaining valuable skills that are going to help them in the workplace later on. Dude, if child labor was not abolished, there would be children scrubbing toilets in McDonald's. That's not going to give them any sort of valuable life experience that they're going to use to go on to be a rocket scientist or go on to be a successful businessman. That's complete, like, bullshit, man. I mean, that's totally ridiculous argument. The students are 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds are going to be much more productive studying in school, learning much more about the world doing that than scrubbing toilets in a McDonald's. I mean, like, what do we think? That back before child labor was abolished, that kids were learning so much about the economic system and rising up the ranks through society, starting as a child laborer in a shoe factory and going on to be Andrew Carnegie's right-hand man. Like, it's ridiculous. This is what is he talking about?
Noting that today in America, the only kids who are allowed to work are the children of rich people. Like, I can hire my kids to work in my business, but if you want to just go get a regular job as a kid, you've got to wait until you're, 15 or 16, depending on the state. And
again, this is not. Being allowed to do that, this in one sense is not a rich poor thing, and in another sense is. In the sense that it's not a rich poor thing, I mean, this is something that mom and pop shops do a lot, employing their kids because they need extra hands around the shop. But do you think that a child that's employed in that labor is going to have an advantage over someone who doesn't have to work and is in state school, right? And in the sense that it is a rich poor thing is the fact that the only kids that are going to benefit from that are going to be kids with rich parents that are being assigned important corporate roles at daddy's company, right? That's the difference that's going to be made there. So again, this is a very sort of Orwellian, strange argument to be making, that to be saying that kids should not be educated in or there should not be compulsory state education. It's completely absurd.
if child labor was actually really detrimental, number one, the rich people wouldn't be having their kids work in their companies. And number two, you wouldn't need laws about it because good ideas don't require force and bad ideas always do. In summary, I highly recommend that everybody go and read the Communist Manifesto because you will see, number one, all the rebuttals you've ever heard about it are actually logically thought through and they're not straw man arguments. It's not like people have built up this false image of communism just to be able to tear it down. Go read the source material. You'll recognize immediately there's no arguments, there's no evidence, there's no logic. These are the ramblings of a bitter, contemptuous, envious man who knew nothing about incentives, reasoning, logic, good arguments, and the way that the world really works and what most people actually want.
Dude, this guy talks about Karl Marx as if he's some sort of dumbass. I mean, read Capital. Like I said before, read Capital. Don't just read one book and say that you're, you know everything about communism. I mean, any educated person would not go and read, the intro textbook to neuroscience and then say that they're a neuroscientist. I mean, read Capital. All the explanations and arguments are there. And if you have half a brain, you can just look that up on the internet if you really want to honestly engage with that material. And another thing is that, Karl Marx, if he also knew about Karl Marx's history, I mean, he was a very educated man. He was well educated in philosophy, in anthropology, in biology. He knew he was an academic. And he was a political economist who spent his life trying to understand the conditions of the working class, and spent his life trying to understand the capitalist system and explain it to people. To say that this guy's just a bitter man and he doesn't know anything is it's an uneducated thing to say, very naive, for real. And I mean, the Communist Manifesto, again, anyone who knows anything about communism understands that it's a call to action. It's not something that is supposed to give thorough explanations as to everything that exists in the capitalist system. For that, you can go read Capital, for real.
is a very short read, very easy to understand, despite it being full of just incoherent ramblings of a bitter, evil man. And unfortunately, in America, we are much closer to that communist ideal, considering those 10 pillars, than most people would like to admit. And by the way, for those of you who are interested, I'd like to share with you an update about my membership program, which you could consider.
Okay, comrades, so that's basically the end of the video. What I'm going to do right now is expand my screen because I want to give you some closing comments and impressions about the video. 1 second. Yeah, so, I mean, let me just make sure my mic's on. Hold on. It's a bit complicated doing the producing for these live streams at the same time as giving an analysis. But yeah, and I'm also not going to advertise the end of his video talking about whatever the hell he's talking about. But let's talk about the conclusions that I personally drew from this video, right? And I saw someone in the chat saying, why are we giving this guy attention? First of all, when we do these reaction videos, right, it kind of allows for some reiteration of Marxist ideas, so we can brush up a bit, you know, engaging with silly ideas from these right-wingers. It allows us to hone our own understanding of Marxism by interacting with arguments like this, even if they sound ridiculous. But that's the dialectical method, so you should be doing it if you're a dialectical materialist. That doesn't mean we're going to stop talking about ACP or anything like that. That stuff's interesting too, but I think this stuff is important, and people seem to like it as well, since we do have quite a few concurrent viewers watching right now also. But the conclusions, right? So many people like this, these kind of right-wing financial bro capitalist types, they read one short book by Karl Marx and they think that they understand what communism is now. But communists literally spend their entire lives still reading about communism and analyzing the material conditions of society, reading economic works, not only by communists, but also by capitalists, to understand how they interact with each other. It's to understand what has to be done in a socialist program, first of all. Another conclusion that can be made by all this is something that I mentioned earlier in the live stream, that this is not a deterioration of capitalism, right? This is capitalism reaching its logical conclusion, its highest stage of capitalism, that, as Lenin called it, right? But if you read Marx, you understand that what Marx talks about actually sort of foreshadowed this logical conclusion of the capitalist system, right? Because he talks about how the inevitable outcome of free markets and competition, which were the dominant aspects of capitalism during Karl Marx's time, the inevitable consequences of those economic mechanisms were the centralization of wealth and power in the hands of a few people who are going to use that to manipulate the state for their own aims and manipulate the markets. So the outcome of free markets and capitalist competition is actually a capitalist society run by corporations manipulating a market so that it's not free and stifling competition, right? I mean, what do we think of as capitalist ingenuity in modern capitalist society right now? You don't think that someone's gonna make a startup and start something in their garage and grow it into a multinational corporation. That stuff happens, and that stuff is propagated by the capitalist propaganda machine to give people the illusion that there's still capitalist competition. But this is like such an infinitesimally small amount of companies. It's not even relevant to the general trends of capitalism right now. If you're really the typical sort of speculator, typical sort of capitalist entrepreneur, is someone who's going to grow a business until they can sell it off to a bigger company and make money on it. That's the actual mainstream trend of capitalist ingenuity now. So you're not actually creating a giant company. You're selling it off to a company that already exists, because we live in monopoly capitalism. You cannot grow. I mean, the likelihood that you will grow a small business that does something
that's in the same market as like Amazon or Walmart, and the idea that you're going to think that you can compete with them is ridiculous. Obviously, that's why you're going to sell off the business so you can make money off of it, instead of declaring all-out competition war with these companies that are obviously going to destroy you and you lose everything. So that's not the same capitalism that existed during the times of Marx. It's not the same capitalism that these libertarian types think that capitalism is supposed to be, but it's the inevitable outcome of the free market system. A system that doesn't have free markets, that doesn't have free competition. And the ultimate irony of what they're saying, what they're claiming capitalism is, the ultimate irony of it is that the only way to decentralize a capitalist economy in the finance capital stage of capitalism, the only way to decentralize it is state intervention, which they're against. The only way they would be able to reduce capitalist society back to the sort of pure capitalism that they believe can exist, the only way theoretically to reduce it back to that level, at least for some time until the circulation of capital again creates the monopolies that it originally created, the only way to do that is to have massive state intervention in breaking up monopolies, which libertarians don't believe in, because the state is the ultimate evil, right? But no, the state would be the only mechanism you could use to break up giant monopolies that are in control of the state right now. And the ultimate thing that all of this has to do with is, like I said, the difference between capitalist and communist, or communist, I mean socialist societies run by communist parties, as is assumed this guy means in this video, is the class which controls it, whether it's under a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie or under a dictatorship of the proletariat. It determines the purpose for what society's resources are going to be used, and that's the main thing. That's what ultimately determines who's going to get richer as a result of economic activities. It's about chain of command. Who's at the top? Is it the capitalist class or the working class? So those are my conclusions about the video, comrades. I hope you guys liked it. I'm going to talk. I'm going to read the chat a little bit, maybe interact with some of the stuff you're talking about. The market was never free. Well, I don't know. There were free markets at some point in the 18th century, I would say. I mean, but they were never the dominant force, right? I mean, even in the 1800s, if we're talking about like industrial, pre-imperialist formations in the United States, for example, the industrial zones were, the state and the capitalist were inseparable. They were always always had corrupt dealings. But I guess if you want to talk about like supremely free markets, you could make an argument that there were free markets during a manifest destiny, I think. But again, that's it's kind of a hard sell. But what else we got here? The practice without theory is blind. Theory without practice is fruitless. That's definitely true. Basically, it all comes down to if you want to be a soulless consumer, Matrix style, or if you want to be part of a collective that travels through life together in good or bad. Yeah. But yeah. All right. Well, I see some people liked in the chat section the reaction videos. I will do more of these reactions. I think they're pretty good. Comrades, if you are not already in the Discord, please join us. Slava, if you could put a link to the Discord, an invitation link to the Discord right now, that'd be great. Join us in the Discord. Obviously, I'm not going to be doing reaction videos for the live streams every week, but I am going to be doing them sometimes, and when I do them, I'm going to put that link in the announcements section and tag everyone in the section so you guys know that a live stream in terms of reaction videos is upcoming, and you guys will be able to submit your own ideas for videos that you'd like to see a reaction to, and I'll choose the best one. So, comrades, it's always a pleasure doing this stuff for you guys. Thanks for the interactions in the chat. Thank you for the super chats. We really appreciate it. So yeah, definitely integrate into our community. Check us out on Instagram, Patreon, Discord, where we do most of our interaction with our audience. We love to hear from you. And see you on the next live stream. And Workers of the World Unite.